Thank you, Leah. Appreciate it. And thanks for coming out. These are always fun for me. I enjoy them because I get to pick the people I'm going to talk about. So I try to go famous man, famous woman each month. So we just happened to land on Jackie Onassis, and it's interesting that President Trump released 80,000 pages yesterday of assassination materials, and I'm told this morning that there's still more coming. So they're unredacted, and including Social Security numbers. I understand one of Trump's attorney's Social Security number is on one of them. So I don't know if it causes too much damage, but I think it's great to have have them come clean. Do y'all remember where you were? Those of you who were around when the assassination took place. I was in ninth grade. I was 14 at BY High School, ninth grade. And Anna B. Hart was our English teacher. But right before her class, I went and used the lavatory, and my best friend, Sid Sandberg, ran in and says, "Hey, they just shot the president." And I said, "Sid, you shouldn't joke about things like that." He says, "I'm not." And they had at the school, they had a phone that the students could use. So this is now the Provo Public Library. And so the old education building, which we kept, I was the attorney for the BY Academy Foundation when we built it. And earlier in my life, was student body president of the high school, but I was just a ninth grader then. And they had one phone that we could use, students could use, and students were all lined up. And when it became my turn to put my dime in, it was a payphone. I called and I got my mother, and she was bawling. She said, "They just announced that he died." And I'll never forget that. So it's a day like 9/11 that you just remember the rest of your life. And I imagine I wasn't around for Pearl Harbor, but I remember my grandmother and mother were, and they talked about that one too. But Jackie Onassis has always been an intriguing figure to me in my life, not just because of the assassination of her husband, which she was the next participant in, sitting next to him in the car when he was shot. But the way she tried to, or did, set an example to get us out of the immediate horrible mood we were in at the time. Seeing her faith and trust and so on, and the way she handled her two little children was just marvelous. But she had a long history in her life of moving up to that event and being able to handle it the way she did. Jackie Kennedy Onassis, Bouvier was her maiden name, was born on July 28th, 1929. And she was an American writer, book editor, socialite, served as the First Lady of the United States from 1961 to 63, as the wife of President John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States. Now, I've tried to bring some pictures of her. These are actually original photos that I got at auction years ago. And there's an explanation on each one, so you can kind of see where she was studying for school, and then after she was married to John F. Kennedy, and they were working in the yard together, and she had the housemaid showing her how to do things in the kitchen, and so on. Those are original photos. As far as I know, they're unpublished, all of them. And there's also a photo of President Kennedy with his little brother Bobby here, which was in the same group that I got. And the other photo I'd point out is the photo of the limousine at Parkland Hospital. The negative is just underneath it here. But you can kind of tell the chaos just looking at the automobile, how they tried to bring the cover out of the, pardon me. Little negatives in there. After the horses got out, after the assassination shooting, it was too bad it was an open car. I think that nobody was thinking, not too many people were thinking of assassination at that time, because our three presidents that have been assassinated were Lincoln in 1865, and then we had Garfield in 1881, and then we had McKinley in 1901. So it had been 63 years since there had been an attempt on FDR at one time. There was an attempt on Harry Truman, but I just don't think it was in the public mindset. And Kennedy was getting ready for running as a second term at the time he came to Texas to settle a dispute. But Jackie's life, during her lifetime, she was regarded as an international icon for her unique fashion choices and her work as a cultural ambassador to the United States. One of the first things she did going to school was her parents were quite well off, the Bouviers. She grew up in Long Island, basically in New York. Her parents split when she was 10 years old, and eventually they divorced. And it was a hard time for her that way. Her mother remarried Hugh Auchincloss, another mega millionaire at the time. Her father actually was in financial trouble during the Depression, even though he was a stockbroker and was well off at the beginning of the Depression. He was kind of a playboy and liked his drinking, and those things kind of brought the marriage to an end. And it was very divisive, and she had to get through that with her younger sister Lee. And there's just the two girls. But she first visited the White House when she was 11 years old, and she was not impressed. She said she was always someone that was interested in historical stuff, and there was very little to see. In fact, even the plates in the plate room, as you can see when you go there, were just from basically the Truman and Eisenhower years. Basically the furniture had been sold off after every administration. People had cleaned it out, and she borrowed every book that she could when she became First Lady to try to find out what kind of furniture was in there earlier, what kind of artifacts, what kind of plates and saucers and so on and silverware they had. Her mother knew Harry DuPont. His name's important because Jackie never met him, but he was a well-to-do guy who accepted the invitation from her when she was First Lady to serve as head of the art committee for the White House, which she created. She got $50,000 from the Library of Congress to restore the White House. That was gone in 2 weeks. So she had to go to private parties, basically, to get people to donate. And she'd go to President Monroe's descendants. She'd go to any of them, the Adams family. She'd go to wherever she could to try to see if they would donate or that they would provide funds so that the White House could go out. This committee that she raised could go out and pick up things, and she was quite successful. She's very organized. She's a very bright lady. Her personal taste, though, kind of tended towards the continental style. She had she won a contest for Vanity Fair magazine in school as a kid, and that was over 1,000 other people. So part of her reward for that was that she could spend half a semester or a semester, half a year in New York with the magazine, then half in Paris. And her mother objected to her being in New York. She objected to her working period. And in high school, when the kids wrote down what they wanted to do, she wrote down, "I don't want to be a housewife." And so she really was not. And her mother had a hard time with that, pulled her out of Vanity Fair magazine in New York, but she went on to the Sorbonne in Paris and spent part of the year out there. She loved Paris. She fell in love with continental furniture, antiques, things like that from particularly France. And she tried to collect those things for the People's House, for the White House. She's had some objections from some of her committee members, but she told them, hey, as long as it's got an eagle on it, it looks American. So bring it to the president's house. Well, she had a fascinating life, and I think she wouldn't have been the star first lady if she hadn't have done some of the things she's done. First of all, as a kid, she was a superior student. She never flunked out of anything, although she got in trouble a lot because she wanted to have her own way with things. And sometimes the schools we're in, particularly when she went to Vassar, they expelled her. But her mother got her back in the next day. So she decided she couldn't stand Vassar, so she ended up at George Washington University. And that's where she got her BA after her year in France, or half year in France. She was a superior student. And she was well known in school for a lot of things, but part of it was her mischief. She had a real sense of mischief. She liked to pull pranks and things like that. And that often got her in trouble with school authorities and so on. She was very talented. She rode horses. I brought today one of her riding hats. And if you look at it close, she signed Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis across the bill. Here's the letter of authenticity on that. And so she loved that. And actually, the picture over here is one of her on her horse. She was quite an equestrian. There's a famous picture of her as First Lady holding John on her lap, and with Caroline, Sweet Caroline, that Neil Diamond did the song after, sitting on the back of the horse. Did you know that? Yeah, Neil Diamond at a concert we went to many years ago. I've got his guitar in my store. He said, well, people have asked me where Sweet Caroline came from. It came from Caroline Kennedy. So I wanted to write something for her if she'd lost her daddy. Anyway, the picture is quite famous. I didn't bring it, but you could see it. And she's riding the horse with John in front and Caroline on the back of the horse. And I don't know about you and horses, but they've never liked me. I've been thrown off of or dumped by just about every horse I ever got on in my life. I don't say that proudly at all. One time, though, the first time I remember was back in about 1955. I was 6 years old, and we were up at Grand Tetons. and I think the horse got hit by a bee or something, but it tossed me off. I was just a kid, so I just kind of rolled around a little. But later, when I got bigger, it was more painful. And after we were married, we were up at the homestead one time, and the guy cinched up our saddle, and I guess he didn't cinch it up tight enough, because I had one boy on front, another little boy on back, and no, I had two little boys on the front, and I was sitting behind them on one horse. We took one little turn, and the saddle went that way, and I went with the saddle, but I decided at a split second to land first, so I was a good cushion to them, but I had a sore back for a while. At any rate, she loved horses. Unlike me, she got along well with them. They were her friends. And when she had a tough event in her life, from the time her parents divorced to other things, including the assassination, she would eventually go out on her horse and ride. And she had a lot of friends that were also equestrians. She wrote poetry, and she made art. She was superior in academics, starting in grade school, although she struggled a little in boarding school because she was in trouble a lot for defying authority, as I mentioned. And yet she still got very good grades, even when she was struggling with them. She got, like I say, she booted from Vassar, but her mother got her back in the next day. And eventually she went to the Sorbonne and then eventually graduated from George Washington. She loved Paris. She was only there during most of 1 year. But she loved Paris, and when she came back, she had on her way back she'd actually covered the young Princess Elizabeth in an article that she'd done. She became the inquiring camera girl for the magazine, for Vanity Fair, and she did a number of interviews during this time before she was married. She was able to talk them into getting her away from just being the receptionist, which is what they wanted her to be when she came back from Europe. And she became the inquiring camera girl, and she did a column in the newspaper and in the magazine all the time on that, locals in New York. At any rate, she eventually talked them into allowing her to go back to the coronation of Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth had met her before. Any of you who watched The Crown, you'll see one little section that's on Jackie Kennedy before she got married. And you need to look for it. It's a short section, but the Queen got acquainted with Jackie when she was Jackie Bouvier, before she was married. And during this time, she also interviewed for the paper and the magazine a couple of politicians, among whom was Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. And she was not overly impressed with either one of them, evidently, but she was introduced by a couple, the Barretts, to John F. Kennedy as a young congressman who was running for the Senate. And she was quite impressed with him. I bet some of you didn't realize that she was engaged before she was married to John F. Kennedy. John Husted was a stockbroker in New York, and she was engaged to be married to him, but she had just met the young John F. Kennedy, and she was much more impressed by him. And she felt like Husted was boring, and the only thing he could do was make a good martini. So he decided to not go through. She didn't go through with the marriage, but she was fascinated by this young senator, because he just was getting elected at this time. She was running. Incidentally, here's a photo of her when she was. This is Jackie Bouvier before she was First Lady, and there are photographs with Dale Chestnut feeding goldfish on the roof pond of the Washington Times-Herald, where she was working in 1952. So that's Jackie Bouvier taking a photograph of her. They had a roof pond, okay? A little similar to our conference center, I guess. Well, fascinating person. Like I say, she was first introduced at a dinner in 1951, hosted by newspaperman Charles Bartlett and his wife Martha, who wanted to see them, wanted to set them up. But at any rate, she didn't see him again until December of that year, just as she had gotten engaged as Husted and then broke it off. She started seeing JFK as a friend and clearly liked him. They were both passionate readers of Lord Byron. They loved his poetry, and they shared feelings, both of them, about Vietnam's independence, which I think is interesting because she became a real scholar. You know, the French were fighting the Indo-Chinese before the Americans got over there, and she was fascinated by the Vietnamese, and so was her future husband. And when they got married, there's a lot of was excited by him and by his interest in Vietnam. And she wrote a report on Vietnam that JFK reportedly used in his speeches. In fact, it was so good that he gave a speech in 1953 as a young senator and based it on her report. And that earned him his first national press coverage as a potential presidential candidate, helping pave the way to the White House. So she really had an effect on John F. Kennedy. And they were always excited about Vietnam and seeing its independence. So that probably plays into his presidency when he was involved in not wanting to expand the Vietnam War but get it over with. She had intended on keeping working after she was married. Like I say, she didn't want to be a housewife. And she had written that in her high school yearbook, that her intention was, quote, not to be a housewife, unquote. However, when she got married, the PR firm that the Kennedy family put out a press release announcing their engagement said that she formerly worked for the newspaper, essentially forcing her to give up her job, and so she was outmaneuvered by Kennedy's PR people, basically. She was shocked. According to an interview she gave to a reporter reacting to the press release by the Kennedys, she said, "Things are a little confusing right now. To tell you the truth, I didn't expect our announcement to include that." Also, you should know that at one point she seriously thought about becoming an actor. She was a beautiful lady, young lady, and she was her father's favorite even after the divorce, which made her sister Lee feel lousy, and there was kind of this, this contention between them for years up until she became First Lady. And at that time, her and Lee buried the hatchet because she needed her sister's help, and they got a lot closer during the presidency. Any rate, in a 1952 letter to an Irish priest, which may have been Cardinal Cushing before he was a cardinal, because that was the man that married the two of them. Before she got married, she wrote about her future husband, and this is important, quote, "He's like my father in a way. He loves the chase and is bored with the conquest, and once married needs proof he's still attractive, so flirts with other women and resents you. I saw how that pretty well killed my mummy." But she was aware of that, Kennedy's proclivity, even before they were married. Anyway, some people have compared his infidelity during the marriage to FDR's. When the wives of both found out their husbands cheated on them, their parents convinced them to stay married to not destroy the men's chance at political careers. A divorce could be the ultimate wrecking ball for presidential aspirations. In fact, old Joe Kennedy, when the first affairs came to her attention and she was ready to divorce him, offered her $1 million to stay in the marriage, and she accepted it. So the offer went up to $20 million if he catches some kind of disease. So a lot of that's not well known, but that was Kennedy family history. She gave birth to 4 children, 2 of whom preceded her in death. She had a stillborn child in 1955. She had a little girl that was, she had a little girl that lived for a few seconds and died stillbirth pretty much too, the second one, and they named Arabella. And then finally, in 1957, she gave birth to Caroline. And that was a joyful time for them. During the 1960 campaign, since she'd had such a hard time with her pregnancies, and she was pregnant again during the time JFK was running for president, she pretty much stayed home. She wrote a column, though, that was published every week about politics and gave her opinions on her husband's ability to be president. We know that John was born in 1960 and that he died in a plane crash in 1999 at age 38 alongside his wife, Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, and her sister, Lauren Bessette, in another Kennedy tragedy. That one took place after her passing. She died in 1994. But the couple's youngest son, Patrick, was born prematurely and died 39 hours later in 1963. The loss of Patrick was devastating to the whole Kennedy family. Everybody was looking forward to Patrick, and this took place just a couple months before the assassination. Everyone said, though, that this finally brought the Kennedys closer together, Jackie and Jack, that it was that these last few months were the best months of their married lives. For the first time, they would be affectionate in public and be photographed actually holding hands. The baby's death occurred in August before JFK was killed in November. The couple's fateful outing to Dallas was Kennedy Onassis' Jacqueline's first extended public appearance after the loss of their child. She was just coming out of her mourning period. She wore his favorite outfit, that pink outfit with the hat. That was Jack's favorite outfit for his wife. And we all remember how she wouldn't take it off after he was assassinated. That outfit, incidentally, has been in the care of the National Archives ever since she finally took it off, but she wore it for nearly one full day. Mrs. Johnson asked if they had a change of clothes for her on Air Force One after the assassination, if she would like to take those off, and she says, "No, I want them to see what they did to Jack." And so she kept them on. The one thing she did do is she cleaned the blood off her face. And as she was doing it, she thought, what did I do that for? But she left the dress on. And those of us that remember that or have seen the films or whatever know that there was still blood on the dress. Incidentally, the pillbox hat disappeared at the day of the assassination. Never been seen since. So I don't know if somebody picked it up or what happened yet, but it's not there. Probably one of the reasons that she had such a difficult time with, she had 5 pregnancies and 4 births, and 2 that survived, was she was a chain smoker. And just like with FDR and his wheelchair, the press was asked not to photograph her when she was smoking, but some photographs now have come out. She was a chain smoker who also smoked while she was pregnant before the medical wisdom advised against that. Any rate, and at that time, a wide swath of the American public thought it was vulgar for a woman to be smoking. So politically, it was out. Official photographers were told not to photograph her when she had a cigarette. There are a few family pictures and things that have come out. Well, I brought a few things here that I wanted to share. This is one of them. Well, I guess I got them up here. One of them is a letter that she wrote during the 60s campaign. She had a beautiful handwriting, incidentally. I don't know if you can see any of this. I'll put this out for sale or for show. This is a letter written on the Carlisle Hotel stationery when she was there with her husband during the time of the debates with Nixon. And it's written to the hotel owner of the Carlisle. I stayed at the Carlisle once before they tore it down in '66, so it's been gone for a lot of years. But it was a beautiful old hotel. At any rate, she talks about how it always upsets me. We appreciate you've been so nice in giving us arrangements at your hotel for us to have the apartment, she says. This is what always upsets me the most about his campaigning. They never leave him alone, so he gets no respite even in his bedroom. I kind of laughed at that because she was sleeping in a separate, on the level above his room, and allegedly Marilyn Monroe spent a night with him here in the Carlisle during the campaign. Whether true or not, you have to kind of chuckle a little at that if that was actually true. I don't know if it was, but at any rate, she was very supportive of her husband, and when he was thinking about it, he was supportive of her, but he was not always a faithful husband, as we know. At any rate, they brought a style to the presidency that I don't think's been matched since. Despite his indiscretions, which were not publicly known at the time, there was great respect for the young couple as the heads of state here in the United States. Jackie was the 3rd youngest First Lady in our history. And John F. Kennedy was the youngest elected president. We had one younger, and that was Teddy Roosevelt. But that's just because he was Mr. Accidency. He became president on the death of McKinley. And we hadn't had a young couple with kids, really, basically, in the White House Truman's had Margaret, but she wasn't that young at the time. Since Teddy Roosevelt. You all remember Teddy Roosevelt. We may do one on him because he's fascinating, but he is, Teddy Roosevelt's mother and wife died on the same day, and he wrote in his journal, "My life's over," something to that effect, and headed west. Left his young daughter, who his wife had given birth to when she died, to his sister to raise, and that became the infamous Alice Roosevelt, who later, when Teddy was running for president, he says, "Look, I can either run for president, control the country, or control Alice. I can't do both." And so sometimes it helps to have Daddy around. But they were, the press in Roosevelt's term were making, New York Times and so on, were making big jokes about the fact that the five Roosevelt kids by the second marriage were hanging from the chandeliers, ruining stuff in the White House. Well, a lot of people were looking at the young Kennedy family in much the same way, but I don't know that they ruined anything. I think Jackie kept things pretty solid there at the White House. She was very, very good at entertaining the kids, and he was too when he had a chance. But I don't know how many of you realize that she started a school. It's the first time there'd been a school in the White House. And she did it because she always worried about the threat of security, even before the assassination, for her two young children. They were famous, and the young kids she wanted to protect at all costs. And those of us that remember her attitude toward the children afterward, that's no surprise. But she created a school, and it eventually became a permanent part of the White House while they were there. It was a kindergarten. And they hired teachers. They had hamsters and snakes and pets for the kids to play with, and it was really an unusual place. And I mentioned how she went through and refurnished the rooms of the White House with antiques, in many cases getting the families of the presidents to give back things that had been sold off or taken home after their terms. And she got a full set of plates from early presidential times, including the Roosevelt, Truman, and Eisenhower plates that have been there. And as a result of that, whenever they ate a meal at the White House, she always broke out the old china. So they'd eat on Mary Lincoln's plates or Anna Harrison. That was one of her favorites, with the Harrisons. Or somebody else's plates that have been in the presidency. And if they didn't have the plates, they'd find one and create some new copies of them so that they could eat off them. That was how important it was to her. Well, we all know that Kennedy was assassinated. Before that happened, I wanted to just share, I've got a lot of John F. stuff, and I didn't really want to bring it tonight because I wanted to focus in on her. But one little piece I did want to bring, and that's this little piece. I don't know if you can tell, but that's all John F. Kennedy's handwriting down here. And the story on this, I became friends with Evelyn Lincoln. You've probably heard the old tale that Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln. Lincoln had one named Kennedy. It was one of the parallels, supposedly. Well, Evelyn Lincoln became my friend in her later life, and I got a couple of things from her that were significant. One that I didn't bring was a letter that he almost sent. It was typed and signed by him to the Pope. Many of you know that he was the first Catholic president. I guess Biden was the other one. I don't know. But anyway, Jackie was a Catholic too, so it worked out fine for them. And anyway, he wrote a long letter to John the 23rd, who was on his deathbed at the time, and basically trying to set up a visit for him in May of '63. And he went on and on about, if your health isn't up to it, we're not gonna worry about it. Well, the Pope died, and the letter was not sent. And so they waited till Pope Paul VI what is the right word? Was put in office, as Pope. And so that's when he met a Pope, was over there. But I got that letter from her, which was kind of fun. And then I got this little piece. These were the two best ones I got. I don't know if you remember their trip to Vienna in 1961. The Kennedys were invited to meet Khrushchev in Vienna. Khrushchev was our main enemy. He's the one that came to the United Nations and said he was going to bury us. Okay, and he's also the one on the other side of the days of October, the missile crisis that happened a year later. But in 1961, he went to Vienna to meet Khrushchev. And Khrushchev was an old World War I vet, and he talked down to Kennedy. I had a friend yesterday that told me that he knew a Russian interpreter that was at that meeting. And he said he explained to us how Khrushchev came out and grabbed Kennedy's hand and just kind of mauled it with both his hands just to take control of the meeting right at the beginning. And this guy was in the meeting and saw Khrushchev pull this stunt. Well, Kennedy was trying to get better relations, but it didn't work out, and it was during the meeting that Khrushchev said, we're going to build a wall in Berlin. And that they did. And so Kennedy thought he'd really blown it in his first visit with Khrushchev. And he flies back to the United States, but he stops off in Great Britain and talks to Harold Macmillan, who was prime minister at the time, and then he flies across the Atlantic. And he's supposed to give an address to the American people the next day about this first encounter with our enemy over there. And I remember the speech. You can also see it now if you want to get online, they can show it to you. But it was on the old black and white at the time. I think they've got it colorized now, but it was on our old black and white TV at the time. And Kennedy was preparing for that on the flight across the Atlantic. Mrs. Lincoln was sleeping up front. Air Force One was a smaller plane, but it was a pretty plane at the time. Incidentally, it had red on it instead of blue back then. So Air Force One, if you see the old pictures of it. I heard Trump wants to go to red again. I don't know if they will or not. But anyway, it had red on it at the time, red, white, and blue. And the predominant color was red on white. But at any rate, Mrs. Lincoln was woke up. She was sitting on her, chair, trying to rest. So crossing the Atlantic, said, the president wants you back in his office. And so I've been on that plane before. It's one of the presidential museums now. And it's a little smaller than the later ones that they've had. But it had a separate room for the president. And she told me she went to that room, just kind of, he was laying kind of on the desk like this when she knocked on the door, and he raised up and he said, Ms. Lincoln, would you remove my papers? And he had all these notes for the speech the next day that were on his desk. And then she noticed this little one was down on the floor of the door where she walked in. She picked them up. She had a little filing system that she carried with her, little portable, and she put this in the personal file and she kept it because she thought it was important. But his writing's a little difficult to read, and he never seemed to spell his name twice the same way. As you look at the handwriting, that was one of his. Well, don't laugh at that, because Joseph Smith was the same way. I've never seen Joseph Smith sign his name twice the same way. So I guess it was, I don't know if it was just the way they learned or what, but this was the note. And she's written on it, notes June 1961, when they're flying back. She says, he wrote, I know there is a God, and I see a storm coming. If he has a place for me, I believe that I am ready. Now that's actually a quote from Lincoln, but Kennedy had written that down on this, probably to use it in his speech. He didn't, but she thought that's pretty profound, and she put it in her books later, and I was able to acquire this from her. I thought it was kind of a special piece. But this is 2 years before the assassination. I don't know that he had any thoughts of that at the time, but I think he did have a place for her. Now, on the assassination, I've got to share you this. This is another letter that I got, not from Evelyn, but it's a letter from Evelyn to a Lawrence R. Chenault in Dallas, Texas. My friend Glenn Beck borrowed this for one of his programs, okay? He said, I got to have that for my show. He did an assassination show a while back. This is written in 1994, so it was 31 years after the assassination. Dear Lawrence, I have your letter concerning the Lincoln-Kennedy parallel that Jim Bishop wrote, and you wanted to know if there was any truth to my warning Kennedy not to go to Dallas. On November 20th, 2 days before the assassination, 1963, her husband was Abe Lincoln. Okay, it was Abe. My husband Abe was eating lunch at the Traders Vic restaurant in the Capitol Hilton Hotel when he overheard some men at a table behind him discussing Kennedy and an assassination in Dallas on November 23rd. Abe immediately called me at my office just outside of Kennedy's Oval Office and told me what he had heard and told me that I should tell President Kennedy about the conversation and that he should not go to Dallas. After hanging up the telephone, I rushed into the Oval Office and told Kennedy about Abe's warning and what he had heard. Kennedy looked at me and said, quote, "Ms. Lincoln, I have to live my life. If they're going to get me, they will get me in church," unquote. And he went to Dallas. Well, kind of an interesting letter. Glenn used it on his program some time back. As we know, really influential in getting her brother-in-law, who kind of stepped in, Robert Kennedy, as the father figure in their family after the assassination, and talking him to run for a Senate term in New York, and then later to run for president in 1968. She always regretted that later, because as we know, Robert Kennedy was also assassinated on June 5th, 1968. Now, I was working at Geneva Steel that day, and my parents and family had all taken a vacation down to Laguna Beach, California. I was the oldest, and I couldn't leave. I had a job. So I watched Kennedy's victory speech in the Ambassador Hotel that night. Flipped it off after he said, "We'll see you in Chicago." So I didn't know till the next day that he'd been shot and fatally wounded. I wasn't the only one. Jackie didn't know it either until somebody called her about 4 in the morning the next morning. And as bad as the assassination of her husband was, this was the final straw. As far as she was concerned, she said famously, "They're killing Kennedys. I've got to get out of this country." She wanted to get her children, keep them safe. And it was during the time they'd lost Patrick, when the president was still alive, that he reluctantly agreed to allow her to go over and visit with a friend of Lee's, her sister, by the name of Aristotle Onassis. And, Lee almost married Aristotle, her younger sister, which became a point of friction later, as you might well imagine. They'd been close during the presidential years, but all of a sudden, she gets introduced to him on his yacht, the Christina, named after his daughter, and they get married in 1969, next year. Now, the American public, what did we think of that? That seemed a little odd, that she would leave the country, A, and B, that she would marry one of the richest men in the world. Well, that wouldn't surprise us, but one of the richest men of the world who was a Greek shipping magnate, okay? And that was very surprising. But according to Airy, the marriage was long nights of looking at each other. He was an old man, 23 years her senior. And even though there may have been a spark of romance, I think she was really looking for security and for protection. I can't read her mind, but just from what we know about her and what she felt like they were in the danger of after 2 assassinations and after losing a couple of kids, she wanted to protect those 2 children that she had at all costs. They didn't live together after the first few months. She moved back to New York, and he went on with his business. So the marriage really cooled, and then his son died in an accident, an airline accident, and he immediately his health went downhill after his boy died. And he was in his late 60s when he died in 1975. By that time, they were living pretty separate lives, but she was his wife of note at the time. And the Greeks had some laws at the time that foreigners couldn't inherit anything from a Greek relative that died. The Greeks had huge taxes too, death taxes, so They didn't want anything going to her. And she also had to fight not only the Greek government, but Christina, the daughter that the boat was named after. Finally, there was a settlement, and she was given $26 million as her settlement for the marriage. Anyway, she never married again, but she got very close to a Belgian by the name of Maurice Tempelsman, and a businessman, and many people have said that was probably the best relationship, even though they never got married. The best relationship that she had with a man in her lifetime was the last one. She wanted to work. She went to Doubleday as an editor in New York after she came back from the RA marriage. And she worked there for a couple of years until a book about, it was a novel, but it brought into, as part of its a story, the Kennedy assassination. And people were blaming her for approving it. And there was kind of this anti-Jackie feeling going on at the time. And she said, I had nothing to do with that book, and she resigned from Doubleday as a result of that. And she went to work for Viking, and she worked for Viking for the next 16 years until she died, right up until her death. This is a picture of her working at Viking. Anyway, she loved book editing, she loved reading and writing, and she did a lot of both during that time. There's a letter that's come to me that I want to end this with, because there's so many more things I could say about her. There's a letter of Joe Kennedy here. I told you a little about his involvement with their marriage. There's one of her brother-in-law, Bobby, here. We got Lee Harvey Oswald's stamp album that he stole from his big brother Bob. And it's here on display, and if you look at it close, it's got, this is the property of Robert Oswald. Down below, Lee Harvey Oswald signed his name. Okay? And this is kind of a special thing, and you wouldn't know what it was unless I showed it to you. But when he got married to Marina over in Soviet Russia, he'd been on the Marine Corps before he tried to leave the United States and join the KGB, and they didn't want him. Basically came back. He brought Marina with him. But he sent this is the original photo he sent to his mother, Maureen, a picture of his wife that he sent, and he's inscribed the back of it. The original's in here, but you can see what the back looked like here. Just put Marina, wedding day, April 3rd, 1962, there. And then to complete some of the assassination stuff, I brought Jack Ruby's Bible. This was a Bible that he gave to one of the guards before he died, and he's written all in it. You know how I was and how I've never changed my story, and it's always the same. And he signs it, Jack Ruby. Says, you would know better than anybody. He's one of the jailers. So that was Jack Ruby's Bible. And then Mrs. Kennedy sent out these little cards, these thank you cards. And we call that a franking signature. You don't have to pay for that if you're with the government and the, congressman and so on. But this is Jackie's card, which President Johnson extended her franking privilege. That's what they call that. And you can send things for free through the mail. But Mrs. Kennedy is deeply appreciative of your sympathy and grateful for your thoughtfulness. That's all it says. And finally, I want to end with this letter. This, in my opinion, is the creme de la creme letter of Jackie that I was ever get a hold of. And it's a recent acquisition. I won't read the entire thing, but I want to read part of it. Their time's about up. Again, it's beautiful handwriting. It's 5 pages long. It's written aboard the Christina as they're heading across the Atlantic, okay? It's written in 1969, so it was right after she married Ari. And just a few lines on this that I think are good. This letter was written to her spiritual advisor, Richard Cardinal Cushing. And Cushing had married them, had been a friend of the family since he was a priest. Now he was a cardinal in the Catholic Church. And he was having some health problems. This is 1969, and he passed away just a couple months after he got this letter. And she's floating across the Atlantic and had time to think about things. And so I think this says a lot about her, probably better than anything else I could end with this. It's addressed from Trinidad while on board the private motor yacht Christina, written to Archbishop Cardinal Richard Cushing of Boston. Your Eminence, your letter, which you wrote from the hospital, was brought to me here by the children who came for the Easter holidays. Dear, dear, Your Eminence, you push yourself beyond the mortal limit in your care and love for others. I sense sadness between the lines of your letter, and I wonder who is there to comfort you. You who expend all strength and love on others. You say you resolved you would write us in your own handwriting. You must not ever do that. I know you feel that you would show how much you care for us if you take the pen to write in your own hand, but we of all people do we need to be given further proof of your love for us. If you ever do that, it will break my heart. The Joan of Arc medals for Caroline, all the trouble you went to, I shall always wear one because it comes from you, and I shall give to her on Easter morning the most precious one, blessed by you and His holiness. For it is in that order that I value their blessedness. With her beautiful words about them, and she will strive all her life to live up to those words. The devotion you give to such little things, the lives of children, that is what touches me so deeply about you, and that it causes pain. And what you do for me, what you do for Ari, the nobility of your sending your speech so that he might give it to his patriarch, Greek Orthodox. I can't describe how I feel when I think of you and me, but in these days I think of many things I never thought about before. So many people we loved are gone. I was hostile. I was hostile to God after He took Jack. You more than anyone brought me back to Him. Now, because of your example, I have the deepest faith that cannot ever again be shaken. So I owe my life and the lives I will try to give my children to you. At any rate, a wonderful letter. I was always very impressed with Jackie Kennedy in so many ways. The way she held up, particularly with all of the rough things that happened in her lifetime. I mean, sitting next to her husband when he was shot, trying to grab a piece of his head, as the Supreme Court, or the Secret Service guy said he had to get her off the hood of the car or she'd fall off. And I don't know how many of you know that she refused to give up his body when they got to the hospital. And the Secret Service man covered his head, which was pretty well blown off, with his coat. But she still refused to give up his body. And finally, the Secret Service guy, by covering his head, by telling him they're going to do what they can, she said, well, I know he's dead. But she finally released the body. And the rest of it is interesting to read, too, if you get into the Parkland Hospital stuff and the rest of it. But I just want to say that she's one of the great people in our lives, those of us that lived through this era, and set a great example, I think, for others going through hardship. And I was thankful to restudy her life as I've done. Oh, one last story I've got to tell you. This one involved me. It was, you know, I go to auction a lot and buy things. And on the day I received my patriarchal blessing, back in 1963, Kennedy gave his Ich bin ein Berliner speech, for anybody that was around or wants to know about that. And I was so impressed, I never forgot that. In 1980, that speech, the originally read from, came up for auction. And I felt like I had to have it. You know, and I was always borrowing money and hoping it wouldn't cause a divorce to pick up things I wanted. I could go into story after story, but my wife has always been my biggest supporter, thank heaven. But some are not, but mine has always been wonderful. Anyway, this came up for auction and I had to have it. Okay, the Ich bin ein Berliner speech. So I stayed with the auction. And I bid the thing up. I bid the thing up to $7,500, which back in 1980 was a lot more than it is now. And I just felt like I couldn't go any further in it. it sold for $8,000. And so I was the underbidder, and I always felt bad about that until a few weeks later, it was in the newspapers reported that the winner was Jackie Kennedy. So I didn't feel so bad about it. That was my close brush with Jackie. And when we were on our mission to Boston, which was the last mission we were on, my wife and I, from 2017 to 2018, we made it a point to go to the Kennedy Library there in Boston. And there on the wall was my speech, one I didn't get. and I pointed that out to my wife. I don't know if I'd told her that story before, but I told her then. I said, well, you know, I was the underbidder on that. And but I felt really good about it when I found out who beat me out. At any rate, thanks. It's been fun.